We're back to the Al Jean and Mike Reiss era, and therefore to Season 3 proper. The Matt Groening, Sam Simon, James L. Brooks episodes are now all done. The Gene Reiss stuff isn't off to a good start, but I see some course correction in the future. I do want to give a quick content warning that the episode includes a depiction of a manipulative relationship, and as such, this video includes some discussion of abusive relationships and some of the trauma responses people can have to them. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Torin, and welcome to Torin Loves the Simpsons. Today we're looking at Season 3, Episode 4, Bart the Murderer, an episode where Bart, on his way home after a rough day at school, accidentally gets involved with the local mafia. And when Principal Skinner goes missing, the mafia points the finger at Bart to throw suspicion off their own backs. Until it turns out Skinner was just trapped in his own garage. Let's dive on in. Let's start with the humor. And as with Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington, in this production run there is a marked difference in the way the dialogue is written and delivered that makes the humor just work a lot better. This is also kind of a plot topic as well, but this episode is also starting to push the envelope just a little as far as the boundaries of the show's reality. Just a little for now, but Bart getting a bunch of guns stuck in his face a couple of times, his catchphrases actually being horses in the race the mafiosos are betting on, and one of them actually winning, and him happening to be an excellent bartender are not the kinds of gags and plot points the show would have gone for in the first 2 seasons. Things can get a little more absurd and meshuggah. We're not at nearly the levels of absurdity of Season 5 or even Season 4. Of course we aren't. There had to be some kind of transition out of the more earnest first 2 seasons, and that's exactly where we're at right now. Of course, this is the episode that introduced Fat Tony and his gang, and Tony in particular, or William Williams as he's named in this episode, is the source of some pretty solid moments. I'm especially fond of his roundabout, incrementalist justification that he uses to convince Bart he's not a crook. He is, of course, voiced by Joe Mantegna, and I definitely see why Mantegna fell in love with the character. According to Al Jean in the DVD commentary for this episode, Mantegna enjoys voicing Fat Tony so much that he insists on being there if the character makes so much as a tiny little peep in an episode. And related to the mobsters, one of my favorite moments in the episode is Skinner's reaction when they say they see promise in Bart. It steams Skinner up so much that he has to go for a walk to calm down, and that's hilarious. Sometimes Skinner and Bart get along, but sometimes they sure don't. And then this episode, like Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington, ends on a punchline. And while it's better than last time, it's still pretty lame. Is that gonna be a thing in Al Jean Mike Reiss episodes? Or is it just these 2 or so? I don't remember it being a thing, and I sure hope it isn't because ending things on a weaker note isn't ideal. But this time it's not nearly a weak enough note to do significant damage, and I'm still gonna give this episode's humor an A+. As for the plot, you can tell right from the start that this episode is going for something. Bart wakes up bright and chipper as can be and immediately steps on a toy. He's gonna have a bad day. This episode is telegraphing that trope in the clearest terms possible. And now that you know what this part of the plot is going for, and the episode knows that you know, and can spend time driving the point home and going for these absurd plot points, like Otto shutting the door on his face, and a rainstorm that suddenly begins as soon as Bart begins his walk to school and suddenly clears as soon as he steps inside. It's a familiar enough trope, but played with the kind of wacky plot points that only The Simpsons was really doing at the time, and that helped the show establish its style. Then we get poor Bart, missing out on a trip to the chocolate factory because he forgot his permission slip. That's devastating for a 10-year-old. I don't blame him for being so bitter towards Skinner here. and it's an excellent way to cap off the kind of rotten day they're trying to portray to set up for the Mafia reveal. In Bart's mind, this is already the worst day ever. How could things get any worse? And then he basically gets kidnapped by the Mafia and forced into providing labor for them. And that's a roundabout way of describing slavery. They briefly enslaved Bart as a trial run before hiring him. That's definitely a way for things to get worse, but it's also perfectly realistic that Bart would overlook it and take to the Mafia under the illusion that they were his friends. It's not always obvious to somebody in an abusive relationship that the relationship is indeed abusive. And for a lot of people, it's easy to go into denial over something an abuser did. And so I really appreciate that kind of nuance within the storyline, and I think the episode portrays it really well. Bart even goes on to pick up on the mobsters' accents and speech patterns. He's identifying with them. And then when Bart is given a reason to question whether things with the Mafia are above board, the roundabout incrementalist justification I talked about earlier in humor also turns out to be an important plot point. It's an apt example of the kinds of language tricks people can use to justify pretty much anything, or fool others into believing wild bullshit. And then comes the reveal at the end of Act 2 that Skinner is missing, and the drama is real. That's a real oh fudge moment for Bart. He knows he's probably in the biggest trouble of his life by far. This shifts things to a serious tone for Act 3, though the episode still manages to balance things with humor really well, using moments in Bart's dream sequence, like Homer chanting, "Kill my boy," and moments in the courtroom, like mention of testimony against Bart by emotionally shattered babysitters, which is also a delightful bit of continuity with The War of the Simpsons and Some Enchanted Evening and their depiction of Bart's relationship with babysitters. Skinner's reemergence is, of course, dramatically timed for just before Bart is about to be convicted, which is another established trope, and for good reason. It works really well and makes for a good climax point for the story. No notes. I also greatly appreciate the depiction of the prosecutor trying to continue to convict Bart even when it has become abundantly clear the crime they're charging him for never happened. It's a fucked up thing to do, and it, unfortunately, happens a lot in this country because prosecutors want to be perceived as tough on crime because that's often perceived as improving safety in communities. Seeing this biting commentary on the US injustice system is a nice change of pace from, and a pleasant surprise after, Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington. There are real stakes to this story. The drama is real, and the journey from worst day ever to abusive working relationship with the Mafia to, oh my god, I'm gonna spend my life in prison and I'm only 10 years old, is powerful. I'm giving this plot an S-. And now for the final rating. We have an A+ for humor and an S- for plot, and I'm going with S- overall. This episode does an incredible job of blending really solid humor with a compelling plot that gets a lot out of one of the main characters. I would consider it a minor classic. Plus, it had Phil Hartman voice 2 characters, and he wasn't even the star of the show. That's impressive. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and I hope you'll hit that like button if you enjoyed my video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to get notified when new videos come out, and up next we're looking at Homer Defined, so I'll see you in that video.